Welcome to the Azalea Society of America's 2021 virtual convention. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rick Bauer, the outgoing president of the Society. As you are aware, we had to cancel both last year's and this year's conventions due to COVID. After we canceled the Houston convention, the folks in the Central Carolinas chapter revamped their plans for the 2021 convention to be compliant with CDC guidelines. This basically reduced the convention to a plant sale, speakers via Zoom, and a requirement to provide your own transportation to the various garden venues. Unfortunately, when the two largest garden venues, R.A. Bartlett Research Arboretum and the University of North Carolina at Charlotte Botanical Gardens, decided that they could not support attendance by groups, we decided that it no longer made sense to hold the on-site convention in Charlotte. Hopefully, we'll have the opportunity to visit Charlotte for a future convention. In lieu of a live convention, we decided to try something new and go virtual. I hope you had the opportunity to view last night's webinar on propagating evergreen and deciduous azaleas, sponsored by the Alabamense chapter of the Society, along with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System and Davis Arboretum. This was the third in a series of 4 webinars. The next one will be held on 10 June, and the topic will be Insects, Diseases, and Disorders. While garden visits are a highlight of any normal convention, we tried to recreate the experience for our virtual convention. We solicited garden videos and video slideshows from our members. I was pleased by the number and quality of the submissions. By loading them on YouTube, they are available for our members to view at their convenience, rather than according to a set schedule. I hope you have had the opportunity to view some, if not all, of the videos. They are still available for view. To access the videos, you can either click on the hyperlink in the second paragraph of my 16 May message, and then enter the password CONV2021. Or an alternate method is to go to the ASA website and click on About the Society, then Conventions, and finally 2021 Virtual Convention Garden Tours. The password is the same, CONV2021. This evening, to prevent inadvertent interference by open mics, we have muted all of the microphones except for the host and speakers. We will open the floor for questions at the end of the program. Tonight's program is an interesting presentation on the beautiful native azaleas of Hurricane Creek, given by our Society Vice President. Tomorrow night we'll announce the Best Azalean article for 2020, the 4 Society members who will receive Distinguished Service Awards, and what I know you all have been waiting for, the announcement of the election results. Afterwards, our incoming president will make a few remarks. Next year, we plan to meet again in person in Lafayette, Louisiana. Denise Lonclos will give us a preview of what's planned for this convention. Finally, the keynote speaker will be Dr. David Creech, president of the Texas chapter of the ASA and director of SFA Gardens at Stephen F. Austin University in Nacogdoches, Texas. He will be speaking on SFA's azalea gardens, past, present, and future. As stated before, your microphones will be muted during the presentation. However, you will be able to ask questions at the end. I will briefly walk you through how this will be done at that time. Tonight we are privileged to receive a presentation on the beautiful native azaleas along Hurricane Creek. It is being given by Charlie Andrews, the Society Vice President, and someone I consider to be an expert on native azaleas. Charlie gives talks on various azalea topics and has written articles for the Azalean and the Journal of the American Rhododendron Society. He is currently working on 2 books on native azaleas. In addition to being Society Vice President, Charlie is on the editorial advisory board of the Azalean and is a past president of the Azalea chapter of the American Rhododendron Society. I know you will enjoy his presentation on the azaleas of Hurricane Creek.
Chris Christopherson wrote a wonderful song titled, "Why Me, Lord?" In it is the opening line, "What have I ever done to deserve even one of the pleasures I've known?" Many of you know that I'm a passionate lover of native azaleas. What are the odds of purchasing a large tract for hunting and fishing, only to discover it is covered with thousands upon thousands of spectacular and unusual native azaleas? If one learns about our North American azaleas mostly from books, you get the impression there are white ones, pink ones, and those that are yellow, orange, or red. Fortunately, plants do not read our books. Our native azaleas are a particularly complex group of plants that we now know, given the chance, will share their genes in nature. Places like Gregory Ball on the Tennessee-North Carolina line and Hurricane Creek in North Georgia are just two natural examples, fully as beautiful as the man-made Ghent and Exberry hybrids. The undeveloped property is comprised of gentle ridges and draws from which the clean water of seeps, springs, and branches eventually reaches Hurricane Creek. Elevation ranges from 1,500 to 1,800 feet. Trout and other wild game were the reasons our family purchased the property beginning in the early 1980s. The property, surrounded primarily by timber company monoculture tracts, seems to have been used for farming on a small scale. Evidence strongly suggests the main product produced was moonshine. We originally purchased the Hurricane Creek property for hunting and fishing purposes. For over 20 years, we also grew Christmas trees as well as harvested and reforested pines. I had no idea when my brother-in-law and I acquired the first tracts in the fall of 1982 that there were not only deer and turkey, but thousands of azaleas and other wonderful flora throughout the property. The beginning of that delightful revelation came the following spring. Halesia tetraptera abounds along the creek. The mostly wooded property is an oak and pine forest. Some selections have been cut and replanted with loblolly pine, but selected hardwoods were left uncut. Other trees and shrubs include sourwood, holly, mountain laurel, dogwood, silverbell, witch hazel, wild hydrangea, Virginia sweetspire, white fringe tree, tulip poplar, crabapple, and persimmon. Calmia latifolia is common, but we have never found Rhododendron maximum on the property. Standing in front of the mountain laurel are azalea hunters Ken Goring, John Coley, and Joe Coleman. Rhododendron canescens, the Piedmont azalea, is the most common. This azalea grows in the bottom of the draws and up on the hillsides, even to the top of the ridges. It often occurs in mass with scores of plants growing together. Rhododendron calendulaceum, the flame azalea, is found here mostly in the bottoms of the draws near water and mostly along the lower elevations of the hillsides. It is seen side by side with Rhododendron canescens. Where one calendulaceum is found, almost always there will be others nearby, but not in the large quantities as seen with canescens. The third species is Rhododendron arborescens, the sweet azalea, which grows here only along Hurricane Creek within a few feet of the flowing water. No other species of native azalea have been found on the property. What is amazing is the number of apparent hybrids and the strong pink colorations in many of the flame azaleas. There is significant overlap with Canescens and Calendulaceum bloom, though generally the bloom of the flame azaleas will extend beyond the Piedmont azaleas. This gives ample opportunity for hybridization. With arborescens, there is a small chance of hybridization here because the later blooming sweet azalea almost never blooms while the other species are still in bloom. Our flame azalea is a tetraploid and has twice the number of chromosomes that the Piedmont azalea and the sweet azalea have. These species will readily cross, but only one way. The flame azalea must be the pollen parent. The concept of ploidy is actually not very difficult. Each parent, the seed parent and the pollen parent, give approximately half of its chromosomes to the seedlings. So, diploids cross with diploids yield diploids because each gives one, the result being two. Likewise, tetraploids crossed with tetraploids yield tetraploids because each gives two, the result being four. And when a diploid receives tetraploid pollen, the result is usually a triploid because 1 plus 2 equals 3. We know from testing, however, that tetraploids reject diploid pollen. Triploids are usually, but not always, sterile. HC080 is a triploid. Interestingly, it is one of the earliest azaleas to bloom at Hurricane Creek. I call it my bellwether plant because it leads the way. When it is in flower, I know it's time to start my annual excursions in the woods here. Joe Coleman calls HC080 early bird. Because she is behind our hunting camp, which is an old, dilapidated, double-wide trailer, I call her trailer trash. The Piedmont azaleas here often have wide petals and come in many shades from white to flush pink to pastel pink to strong pink. They have the characteristic glandular flower tube which often curves downward instead of staying straight as do the tubes of flame and sweet azaleas. There are some canescent plants here with a wingspan of over 2 inches. Some of the spring ephemerals are Viola pedata, and on the next image, Iris verna. Almost all the sweet azaleas are found within 5 feet of the creek itself. Many are leaning over the stream, their white blossoms perfuming the air above in late May and into June. Note that the sweet azalea is distinctive in that its stamens tend to be widely separated. With most native azaleas, the stamens are usually close together, not spread out. While the pistil and stamens are usually red or pink, this is not always the case. Furthermore, the hammock sweet azalea, Rhododendron viscosum variety cerulatum, can also have red pistil and stamens. In its distribution from Pennsylvania to Georgia, the blossoms of Rhododendron calendulaceum tend to span the color spectrum from yellow to red, with orange being most common, yellow being less common, and true red being rare. Most reds are what I would call red with orange tones. Here is what one might expect in a typical calendulaceum. golden orange flower, open face, some crinkled edges. Some are an orange red. John Coley is inspecting this one, which has nice orange blossoms. And here's a close-up of the blossoms. Note the flat, open face, so typical of southern flame azaleas. HC074 is in the more yellow portion of the spectrum with an apricot flush. HC130 was tested and it is a tetraploid. It has a two-tone coloration. The blotch on HC020 covers not only the whole standard petal, but extends across the top of the wings. This flame azalea resides happily right on the edge of Hurricane Creek, displaying its many colors. You can see the characteristic lime green stigma and that the anthers are full of pollen. HC136 has pink flavor mixed with orange, giving it a melon orange coloring. It has never been ploidy tested. The red stamens with gold corollas on HC142 make a striking contrast. HC165 is one of those flame azaleas whose blossoms opens yellow before turning darker orange. HC158 is another untested plant with melon coloration. HC152 is an attractive tetraploid with dark perimeter and lighter interior. Another common characteristic of the flame azalea is a wingspan of over 2.5 inches. The most common trillium on the property is Trillium catesbii. Two other plants common on the property are Lycopodium digitatum, running cedar, and Cypripedium alkali, pink lady slipper. It is coincidental that the names of both of the genera are about feet, Lycopodium and Cypripedium. One is a Greek reference to wolf's foot and the other to Aphrodite's sandal. It is special when you can see over 100 lady slippers in one spot. Hurricane Creek has quite a few yellow flames, as these next 7 images illustrate. Here is a nice creamy yellow with a darker blotch. Around HC045 are about 9 plants, all very similar with yellow blossoms. HC202 is the purest yellow I've seen on the property. The tubes are not any darker than the petals, and there is barely a noticeable blotch. Hurricane Creek itself is fed on the property by bold springs and perhaps a dozen small branches. In years past, I have caught trout up to 16 inches long from the small stream. At the same time as the azaleas bloom, the bottle brush-like flowers of Tiarella cordifolia mix with the ferns on the bank of the branches and the creek. Michella repens flowers just above the water's edge on the mossy creek bank. And so does Parnassia acerifolia. There are many ferns in the moist bottoms along the bowl springs, the branches, and the creek, including cinnamon fern and royal fern. Decumaria barbara is common here. It and Virginia creeper are the two most common vines, if we exclude poison ivy. These next three photos show some of the redder flames. HC 216 is a strong red-orange. HC 140 is another. These redder colors vary from year to year, darker in some years, lighter in others. This one, HC 075, is quite red with a small orange blotch. Chionanthus virginicus is not common, but it does occur here. While Calycanthus florida is everywhere. Itea virginica is another creekside shrub. We have taken a look at the more or less typical azalea species at Hurricane Creek. Now let us see what happens when these species share pollen. This next group of images are all tested triploids, possibly the result of tetraploid pollen on diploid plants. If one were to look at a triploid corolla in black and white, the corolla would tend to favor the tetraploid parent. The colors, however, are amazing. Apparently, rhododendron canescens introduces new color genes, which when combined with the typical colors of rhododendron calendulaceum, produces a kaleidoscope of color. Multicolor pastels, whites with big blotches, often with pink flushing, hot pinks, bright egg yolk blotches, red with cream blotch. All these are natural hybrids. Use my hand and wristwatch to see how large that flower is. Flower size and color vary from year to year. HC 053 is in a group of 5 almost identical seedlings. HC 049 is a delicate pastel of yellow, pink, and white. What is not to like about HC 114? Frilly, pastel, multicolored. This nice pastel is growing in an old rotted sawdust pile left from a previous lumbering operation many years ago. How about a hot pink? Here is another nice pastel. These flowers sometimes approach 3 inches. Not tested, but probably a triploid. This is another one that is not tested, but also probably a triploid. I've never seen a native azalea like this. Cherry red petals with a white to cream blotch. HC055 is a tested natural triploid. Collinsonia verticillata is common throughout the property. It was named by Linnaeus for the English Quaker Peter Collinson, who with the aid of John Bartram introduced our North American azaleas to the British in the 1700s. Lagodium palmatum is a rare plant occurring in small populations in North Georgia. Panax trifolius is another rare plant for this area. Here is another surprise. One assumes, perhaps naively, that a tetraploid azalea in the North Georgia mountains has to be a flame azalea. After all, there's no other known tetraploid in this area. Yet aren't flame azaleas supposed to be yellow, orange, or red? Again, plants don't read our books. Now let us look at some of the tested tetraploids from Hurricane Creek. These are flame azaleas that perhaps through many, many years of close association with other species have inherited colors not usually seen in Rhododendron calendulaceum. Look at the color combination on HC061. The petals are split vertically with half pink and the other half cream or light yellow. HC154 often has twisted and recurved lower petals, a characteristic often found in Rhododendron canescens. HC051 is unusual in that it has both yellow blossoms and pink blossoms in the same truss. Here is another view of HC051 showing the pink blossom with an orange blotch. HC018 is a pink tetraploid with a strong yellow blotch. HC063 is another deep pink tetraploid with a dark blotch. HC131 is a delicate tetraploid. I incorrectly guessed it would be a triploid. Hurricane Creek has many old large azaleas. Here you see Joe Coleman walking in the wintertime along a small branch of Hurricane Creek among the trunks of native azaleas. Are these large trunks from one plant or multiple plants? HC016 is fondly called Earl's trunk because Earl Somerville spotted this large trunk azalea some years ago. This rhododendron arborescens leaning over the creek has a trunk diameter over 5 inches. You are looking at the root crown of HC021. The crown of this flame was over 20 inches. Several of the major trunks above exceeded 6 inches. Gentiana saponaria, one of the so-called bottle gentians, blooms along the creek in the fall. Hamamelis virginiana is common here and also blooms in the late fall. Over 150 plants have been ploidy tested. The results clearly show that there is active hybridization taking place between Rhododendron calendulaceum, the tetraploid, and the diploid species, primarily Rhododendron canescens, because of the significant overlap in the bloom time. Hybridizers have made crosses using our native azaleas. We have Ghent, Knaphill, Exberry hybrids. There are Aromi hybrids, the Confederate series, and more. The natural hybrids from Hurricane Creek certainly compare favorably and are acclimated to the Piedmont area. The genetic material of the southern Appalachians and foothills is amazing. I hope you have enjoyed your virtual tour of native azaleas and other flora of Hurricane Creek. We plan to have some azalea cultivars available for the 2023 ARS ASA Joint Convention to be held in the greater Atlanta area. If you would like to visit Hurricane Creek sometime, you may contact me at candrews@mindspring.com.
Now we'll open the floor for questions. I will briefly walk you through how this will be done. As I stated before, your microphones were muted during this presentation. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see multiple icons. You may have to scroll your cursor over this area to bring up the toolbar. Click on the Participants icon. On some of these slides, I will show you a blow-up of the activity to make it visually clearer. These blow-ups will not occur on your computer. A panel showing all of the participants will pop up on the right side of your screen. All of the participants except the host will be shown as muted. In this case, Paul is the host and I'm the participant. If you want to ask a question, click the Raise Hand button. The moderator will initiate a pop-up asking you to unmute your microphone. Click on the Unmute button. You will now see that you are unmuted and can ask your question. Once you have asked your question, the moderator will mute you once again. Click the button shown to lower your hand. You are now muted again and your hand is lowered.